Okay. Hi. So I have been thinking about and playing around with the idea of making a video about like my whole story and my journey a lot lately. And I've kind of gotten guidance in one way or another from like 3 different places now that I should just do it. So that's kind of where I'm at. I was feeling pretty confident about it because if you know me, like if you've spent any measurable time talking with me and an opportunity for me to kind of like share my story comes up naturally, I do. I'm not ashamed of my story. I spent a lot of my life being ashamed and afraid and I guess feeling guilty about it. And now I can fully recognize that it's not my shame, it's not my guilt, it's not my secret. So I'm just kind of the person that if it comes up, I talk about it. And I try really hard to be mindful and make sure I'm not kind of oversharing or sharing in a way that might traumatize or trigger another person. I try to be very mindful and make sure I'm not trauma bonding or anything like that that's kind of like this unhealthy kind of unresolved way or way of dealing with unresolved trauma. I think I've worked really hard. I don't know if I'll ever get to the place where I'm like, my trauma's resolved. But yeah, so I'm open about this. I'm kind of an open book. As a side note, I'm doing like shadow work right now, which is, I feel like I've already done everything I kind of need to do like through therapy and counseling, but it's just something I was interested in. So I grabbed this little burn after writing journal, and it has a bunch of prompts. And one of them, the one I worked on last night, was like, when's the last time you lied? And I like really had to think about it. I was like, I'm not the kind of person that feels I need to lie or like is ever put in a situation where I need to lie. So like I'm a pretty open book. Like I work really hard on being an open book and being transparent and honest and vulnerable. Actually, being honest is one of my like things from like my life, is that I feel like I hyper fixate on like, is this true? I just always want to be honest and truthful. So yeah, I try and I think I'm in a healthy place to, when I just mean that when I talk about it, I'm not someone who's oversharing and like, oh, hi, how are you? I was abused as a kid or something like that. You know what I mean? I feel like everyone's experienced that, the kind of person that you meet in the grocery store and they like tell you their life story, and it's like, whoa, like this is a lot of information and stuff. So it's not like that, but I am just open and I'm always willing to be vulnerable, which I think is important. Yeah. So when I sat down and I started writing down like talking points. It's kind of gotten absurd now. I think that this might have to be a multiple part video, but there's so much to it that I can go off on tangents and kind of not stay on track. So I wanted to make like a little guide for myself. And when I started to write down like my guide, I was surprised that I started noticing all this like internal resistance, like I don't want to do this anymore, come up, because, and it's surprising to me because I am such an open book. I have mentioned this to a bunch of people in my life already. It's just, I want to share my story because what I want to do, the direction that I feel like I'm being like kind of pushed into, is to help people kind of feel empowered to take their healing into their own hands from past traumas, because I think that trauma is very insidious in our culture. It's just a part of the way all of us are growing up, the way we exist walking through life. So everyone has experienced some degree of trauma, and it doesn't even matter necessarily if like someone else might perceive that trauma as a big deal or not. It matters how the individual perceives that trauma and how it's affected with them and their day-to-day life, and if they're carrying it with them, and if it's affecting their relationships and the way they interact with people. And I'd like to help people alongside a trained medical professional, if that is what they're doing, like if they're seeing a counselor and stuff, because again, I'm never going to pretend that I'm a mental health professional, but alongside professionals like that, encourage people to take their healing into their own hands, because even the most qualified, amazing counselor cannot do the work for you. You have to decide to do the work yourself to heal and overcome your traumas. And I've seen that firsthand. So, and that's where yoga and meditation comes in for me. So I want to help people experience that too and feel empowered to take their healing into their own hands, and walk with them on that journey, and just kind of be a little bit more of a guide and a voice for them to like listen to and relate to. So if I want to do that, I have to share my story. I kind of have to share where I've come from and how yoga and meditation has helped me. So that is why I've decided at this point to make this video. It's why I decided to make a kind of guideline for how I'm going to get everything out. And yeah, this will probably turn into a multiple part video, because we're talking about my whole life. I'm 30 years old, so it's been a journey. And I will say now, we are talking about some heavy stuff. So I will put a trigger warning in the description. I'm saying a trigger warning now. The trigger warning is regarding childhood abuse, more specifically childhood sexual abuse. I will not be going into details about my abuse, but I am talking about it, and it can be very triggering. So I encourage you to take a moment for yourself and kind of check in with whether you are in a place emotionally to listen to someone else's story. And obviously it has a happy ending. Here I am, I'm fine. I'm a happy person. So it has a happy ending, but it is a lot of trauma that I'm gonna mention and talk about. So placing your mental health as your priority, take a second to check in. Is this something that you have space to hear right now? Is this going to be beneficial to you to listen to? I also sometimes, for me personally, scrolling along, Facebook or Instagram, I might see trigger warning. I might see trigger warning childhood sexual abuse, and I might have this like, my curiosity might override that feeling of like, oh, I kind of don't think that I should probably be reading this right now, or I don't have space for it, or it's just not something I need to read right now. Occasionally I have a curiosity factor that kind of overrides that initial, like, probably shouldn't read this right now. So I'd like you to take a second again to check yourself and check in with your mind and, question your motives. I've questioned my motives in sharing my story. I've reflected on it and ensured that, like, I'm sharing for appropriate reasons, not like I mentioned, like trauma bonding or for attention or something like that. So I think it's important to check in with yourself that you want to listen for reasons that are okay, not, just kind of a morbid curiosity that can get us sometimes, and not that there's anything wrong with that. That's a part of life. But maybe if you notice, yeah, I'm just kind of curious right now, I just feel like being nosy, maybe you take a second and you're like, my mental health is more important than being nosy. Because I'm only saying that because I can relate. There have been times that I'm like, oh, a trigger warning that directly affects me and will very possibly negatively impact my mental health at this very moment, and I'm going to click it and read it. So that's part of human nature. I just want you to be mindful. And again, it's a part of empowering you to take control of your healing. It's up to you whether you stop listening or not. That's your choice. That's your right. All right. So, I want to get started talking about my life and what's gotten me to this point. I mentioned in my little preemptive post on my stories on Instagram that in 2017, my sister and I co-wrote a blog together to kind of publicly tell our friends and families what we had been through and what was going on. So I put a link there. I'll put a link in this video as well, because if you haven't read it, I think it's a good starting point. I'm kind of thinking of my life in terms of this blog, like as a reference point. I might refer to it as like BB before blog and AB after blog. I'm just kidding. I'm an idiot. but yeah, it was a big moment. It is a good starting point because it kind of is like, this is what happened to us. So yeah, oh fuck. I'm nervous. I don't know why I'm so nervous. Yeah, my sister and I, when we were kids, were sexually abused by our older brother. My sister, for reference, is 18 months younger than me. I'm the middle child, and my brother is 4 years older. Her and I do not really have memories, knowledge specifically relating to how old we were when it began and when it ended. All I kind of know is that we are talking about like years of abuse, and not just the sexual abuse. There was other kind of like intimidation happening. Just for example, he used to chase my sister around the basement with like homemade shanks and stuff like that. So he was like, as a little kid, he's a scary person that we lived with, and this went on for years. And just to say, like, I will be mentioning my sister a little bit, but I'm going to try really hard to stick to my story. It's not my place to talk for her or to share her story, because it is, even though it was the same house, the same abuser, she has a different story. So I'm not going to speak for her. I'm going to try and keep the lens focused on me, because I would never want to do that to someone. And it's just, I'm just trying to keep it a narrow lens. So yes, it was her and I. We don't know exact ages, dates, stuff like that, but I do know we're talking years. plural. And in my head, more than 2, like a significant amount of time is what we're talking about. And again, I'm looking at here, it's my notes of like my main things that I want to talk about to tell kind of my journey from, you know, then to now. So that's what I'm looking at here. And yeah, so I'm not going to try and describe my sister's experience or tell her story, but she is a part of my story, so I will mention her here and there. And so this was happening as I was a child. I went through life just feeling very, very fucked up on the inside, like not really feeling like I knew what was wrong, just that something was very, very wrong. I don't have a lot of memories of my childhood because I feel like I just existed kind of on autopilot, put my head down, got through it until I was kind of out of that house, out of that situation. So I feel like I was very like, just, I don't know. I just don't have a lot of memories. I won't try and self-diagnose. I do remember, you know, there were times that I would be in trouble. I'd be sent to my room for one reason or another. And I remember vividly sobbing on the floor and begging for God to take me and stuff like that. So like, I didn't know at the time. Now I know that I was having like passively suicidal thoughts as a little baby kid. So yeah, it was bad. It was significant. I remember being older than in that memory, but kind of sitting on our couch at the time and really like, I felt like life, how did I know this was real? In my head, I think I was kind of like dissociating a little. I was really concerned about what if I'm not real? What if this isn't real? What if this is like someone's writing a book? How would, like, do book characters know that they're just characters? Like, is someone writing this about me and I'm just a character in a book? And that kind of feeling and fear really stuck with me. It impacted me and kind of shaped a lot of my thinking. I was very concerned about it. And then as I got older, I was very concerned that I was concerned about that. I was like, people aren't concerned about this. Other people aren't afraid about this or worried about this or anxious about this. So it kind of added to my just like feeling like I'm fucked up and no one else is, and no one else would ever get it or like understand what it's like in here. And so, yeah, that's how I went through life. My mom liked to say that I was born anxious and that I basically had an anxiety disorder from the time I was born, which as I got older, became kind of like, what the fuck? Like, don't say that. Something was happening to make me act that way, you know? But she used to say that all the time, that I just was an anxious kid. I was an anxious baby. That was how I was born. It was in my genetic makeup type thing. As a kid, I was like a sickly kid. I was always sick or pretending to be sick, which additionally like added to my shame and my guilt, because like I didn't know why I was always saying that I was sick, but I wasn't really sick. Like I didn't have a fever. I didn't even have like symptoms. I just would say I was sick and wanted to stay home all the time. I was always breaking bones. I was always hurt. I was very clearly struggling with severe anxiety that like in and of itself, like, especially as we know today, I'm not going to pretend that like the parenting world that I exist in is the same that my mom and dad existed in. It's very different. But like by today's standards, it'd be like, get your fucking kid help. Like, she is drowning in anxiety. She cannot function. She needs professional help, is the kind of like kid I was. Like, I was struggling very deeply. And I really went under the radar because we lived in a beautiful house, in a beautiful neighborhood, in a beautiful town. We were all white. My parents are still married, middle class, you know, lovely, from the outside, a lovely family. Mom stayed home, dad worked hard. And like, my parents are, at the surface level, they seem like nice people. And my sister and I are fucking awesome. Like, no, just kidding. But yeah, we seem like good kids, seem like a good family. I was sick a lot, but like, besides that, no one was looking at our family thinking something's wrong, something's going on there. And I lived, even with the abuse, I lived a very privileged life. I have never gone hungry. I have always had a roof over my head and my very own bedroom and my very own bed. So I certainly don't want to put this out there like, oh, I was, you know, struggling in all those other ways. I was very privileged. I am very privileged. I'm a white woman living in America. But this is my experience, you know. From that lens, I do feel like I really flew under the radar as far as my struggles going overlooked. And so along with those, you know, kind of memories, I was always hurting myself, breaking bones. There was one summer that I broke one wrist, and then like 3 months later, I broke the other wrist. Like, again, when I say like, oh, I pretended to be sick a lot, I also I feel like there was something in me that wanted to get hurt because I was hoping for attention or something, which is also like weird and tricky for me to kind of deal with and process, because I think I was clearly attention seeking, but I also am the kind of person with like social anxiety, and I hate when all the attention is on me. So there are periods throughout my story, I'll mention a couple different times that it's like I was attention seeking, but I was also desperate to escape the attention if the spotlight was ever focused on me. Doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. But again, not a mental health professional. That's just my experience. So yeah, I remember like breaking my wrist or like spraining it type thing, got hurt, and they're kind of like, is this a sprain? Is it a break? Doing x-rays and like really, really wanting it to be broken is what I remember. And it's just like, as I got a little bit older, even at the moment, it led to feelings of guilt, because I was like, this is weird. Like, no one wants to break a bone. No one wants to get hurt. Why do I feel this way, kind of thing. So yeah, along with that, I also clearly remember several different times, a handful of times, that I specifically was crying out for help regarding my abuse and making my abuse stop with my mom specifically. I remember literally telling her that he was touching my insert cutesy name that we used for our private parts when we were little in my family. And I remember my mom's reaction. She was like, what? And I, being the kind of kid that like, I just wanted to be good. I wanted to do everything good. I never wanted to make anyone mad at me. I just wanted to follow the rules and stay in the box and stuff like that. That turned into this like, oh, she's mad at me. I can't. It was another thing that I was like, okay, can't talk about this. And obviously nothing happened when I told her that anyway. I remember describing to her very specific symptoms of a UTI, and her kind of saying, I don't know what to tell you, like, and not taking, I don't know if she took me to a doctor or not. I don't believe she did. And I also remember there's a memory that tormented me for well into my adult life, until I got help with counseling, of me standing outside of our bedrooms. I was going to sleep in, this is when we were little, I was going to sleep in my sister's room, and I was saying goodnight to my mom, and my brother was standing there, and I kept saying that he could come in and say good night to us one time. And I kept saying one time, over and over, in front of my mom and in front of my brother. And I remember him like visibly getting like, shut up. And my mom kind of like standing there and never even questioning whether or not, like, why was I saying that so many times? And as a side note, and as a parent now, I'm like, why was he allowed to come in to say goodnight to us after we were asleep at all? One time was way too many times. Like, now I'm like, I am not going to disturb my children when they're asleep. They need their sleep. I don't know why that was okay to begin with. But then, you know, I was very clearly trying to call him out in front of my mom, which is ballsy, like with what I know about how I was as a kid, very like what I would describe as like submissive, I guess. That sounds weird, but just kind of like, okay, whatever. Yeah, I think I found some courage for that night that I tried to stand up for us. And my mom didn't do anything about it, didn't ask questions, never addressed it, nothing whatsoever. So that's to say just that I truly believe that my mom knew what was happening and was in denial. Whether that denial was like purposeful or not is up for debate. But she really looked the other way through a shitload of red flags and warnings. So yeah, that being my experience of as the abuse was happening, and my mom kind of, there were moments of feeling shame, like I was wrong, combined with her really ignoring other obvious calls for help. It led to me really turning inward and just being like, this is not something that it's okay to talk about. This is something that you never speak about. So yeah, I remember it was like I wore a metaphorical gag in that house, or even sometimes up until I was an adult, like just being around my mom. I vividly remember being in trouble, sent to my room for one reason or another, and my mom coming to talk to me about it, and sitting on the bed and really just wanting to say something, to tell her what was going on. Because I remember her prompting me like, what is going on? What is wrong? What is wrong? And I wanted to say something so bad, but it was like the words would like crawl up my mouth, and then my mouth would just not open. It would crawl up my throat, and my mouth was just locked. It would not open. And I'd sit there like screaming in my head, like, say it, say something, say anything. And then I'd be sitting there with her, you know, trying to prompt me for 5 whole minutes without saying a single word. And I'd be telling myself, well, you waited too long now it's weird, you can't say anything. So it was, I really, I don't know, I just couldn't talk. And so that's how I went through life. I do remember, I mentioned in my blog, I remember learning about abuse in elementary school. They played us videos of like physical abuse, sexual abuse, stuff like that, kind of like for the kids, like, if this is happening to you, it's not right, and there are resources to help you. And when it talked about sexual abuse, I remember thinking that happened to me. But I still was never telling anyone. I didn't talk about it with anyone, not friends, not, not my sister, not anyone. And so, yeah, I was very much the perfect kid, never got into trouble, at school or at home, like just really tried to follow all the rules, avoid extra attention, and just go through life and get through it. When I got towards high school, that changed a little bit. And when I'm just checking because I know there were things I wanted to mention early on. Additionally to like feeling like I was on autopilot, I desperately wanted to be older, and I didn't know why. I think a lot of people can probably relate to wanting to be older, to have the freedoms and stuff, but I was desperate to get older, and I didn't understand it at the time, but now I understand. I have very few memories besides like begging for help, basically, and feeling really messed up and trying to, stay home from school or whatever, hoping for broken bones and all of that. Or just have notes. It's kind of out of order just because the way my memory kind of works and the way that memories have resurfaced for me, it's like, this all happened, and then somewhere in my timeline I have this poof new memory that it almost feels like when new memories come up for me, it's almost like I never forgot them. They never disappeared. It's just like, oh yeah, I remember that now. So it's out of order, but like in my head, I can shuffle it back and be like, oh yeah, that happened at this point. But when I was writing it down, for the most part, it's like chronological, and then there's occasionally like, oh yeah, this was earlier, that I wrote down. So that's just what I'm looking through. So, I know for a fact, I know in like probably middle school, abuse was not happening anymore. It might have even been in elementary school at some point. But definitely by high school, by the time we moved to where I went to high school, I was definitely not being sexually abused anymore. But what makes my story kind of like complex is that as bad as the sexual abuse was, I personally feel like it's one of the worst things that a person can go through. As bad as that was, a lot of my trauma and triggers and all that really has to do with my mom, my parents, and isn't that so fucked that it's always the mom, right? It's always the mom. You watch a serial killer documentary and guess what? Mommy didn't love them enough. But it's always the mom. But it's such a significant relationship. Like we said in the blog, my sister and I, that this is the person that like innately, instinctually, you're supposed to be able to trust with your life. Your life depends on your trust for your mother and your mother's abilities to raise you safely. So I think in and of itself, like the mother wound, there's a name for it and everything. The mother wound is like, oh, it's a big one. It's bad. And my mom, again, I'm not going to diagnose her. She will not go to therapy long enough to be diagnosed. And like not even my therapist could diagnose her, because you can't diagnose someone you've never met. You've only heard, a third party tell you stories about. But I believe she very likely has narcissistic personality disorder, which you can read all sorts of things about how that messes you up in and of itself. But she is very much that is her personality. So in and of itself, that leads to trauma. And then the fact that it was something as traumatic as childhood sexual abuse, that she was kind of using all these narcissistic the tricks up a narcissist's sleeve to minimize and manipulate and control, and all that has, I don't know, affected me. It's affected me a lot. I don't know if it's affected me more. It's obviously married together and interwoven, but I'll put it this way. I spend most of my time, especially when I first started counseling, talking about my mom and the relationship there, as opposed to the sexual abuse. And so I feel like that's what makes it tricky, is like, that was bad. Now we're getting into, for me, what was worse. And by the time I got to high school, I was no longer being sexually abused, but I was very much dealing with the aftermath. And again, not talking to a single soul about this, just kind of like going through life, kind of telling myself like it's over, like, and I got my first serious boyfriend when I was a freshman in high school, who was the fucking worst, like just a horrible person. If you have a daughter, the very last person you would want her to date. He very much used every trick that they warn you about in like sex ed to pressure me to do things way before I was ready. He was a pathological liar. Like everything he said was a lie. He would tell these like really elaborate stories and stuff like that of his life and his experience that just were 100% untrue and made up. He really coerced me into doing a lot of things I wasn't ready for and didn't want to do, but ended up doing because I was the perfect person for someone like that, who wants to experiment in all these ways and put in these, situations, because I wanted to make him love me. I wanted to be, I didn't feel like I had the right to say no. It very much felt like my needs were not a priority. It was about him. That's how my generation of girls. I think it's changing a little bit, and I hope to see more of a change, but the messaging through my, adolescence was that sex is about male pleasure. It is not about your pleasure as a woman. And if you don't get any pleasure, you better fake it so that he doesn't feel bad about it. So that's very much, I didn't feel empowered to have a say in that. So I wasn't necessarily saying no to certain things, but I didn't want to do them is all I'll say. So yeah, he was a bad person. During that period in my life, I was extremely low. I was extremely depressed. He really made me feel worthless. It was very much an emotionally abusive relationship for my first real boyfriend. He kind of isolated me from all my friends. I really lost most of my friends during that period. He was the first person I ended up telling my secret, is how I thought of it at the time. I told him just the bare minimum of like, this happened to me. And he used it against me because he was the kind of person that he would break up with me and get back together with me like nightly. At one point, it was seriously like he'd invite me over or come over to my house and we would hang out, get in a fight. He would dump me. He would make up with me just long enough for us to have sex before I had to go home or he had to go home, maybe even break up with me again and then get back together with me the next day. Like it was a complete mind fuck. Now it's embarrassing for me to, I do have feelings of shame and embarrassment surrounding this because it's like, the way I am now, it's like, why would you ever, like I've looked at people and thought, why would you ever let someone treat you that way? But I did. And I let it happen for a long time. It was like a year or maybe just over a year-long relationship, I think. And what had happened was he broke up with me, got back together with me all the time. That was not a new occurrence, but there was a time that he broke up with me one night, went to a party and had sex with someone else, and then told me about it the next day and was kind of expecting me to get back together with him. And at that point, something switched in me and I was like, no more. And I thought he was lying. I was like, you are a liar anyway. Like, I know you didn't do that, but regardless, I'm done. I'm not doing this anymore. Turns out he did because he had her text me and tell me to confirm. It's funny now. It wasn't funny then, but something switched in me and I was just like, I'm done. I'm not doing this anymore. And he went a little nuts and he threatened to tell my mom my secret, which was like the worst thing in the world you could say to me. I really was like, don't do that. No, that almost got me, but he was a very damaging person. It was, luckily I had a certain level of like, I don't trust a word he says. So I part of me was like, he won't do that, that it didn't work. He kind of went a little crazy. He like, would write me notes and letters and he would, I'd go after school, I'd have track practice and I'd leave my phone like in my locker and I'd come back and I'd have like 30 texts and like 10 missed calls and stuff like that. And he would be extremely like verbally abusive, calling me like the worst names ever and saying what like a whore and a horrible person I was. And then I was just at this place that I was like, okay, cool, whatever, then leave me alone if that's what you think of me. And he'd leave me alone for like an hour and then he'd start texting me and saying like, oh, I'm sorry I said that, I'm just hurt, blah, blah, blah. And I'd say, it's fine, whatever. And he'd say, so are we gonna get back together? And I'd say, no. And so then it would start again. Well, you're such a whore and a bitch and blah, 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 over and over. He tried to manipulate me by saying that he was gonna like kill himself and stuff like that. So it was bad. Up until that point, like with him in that relationship, I was so very depressed and just in such a dark place. I remember like standing in the shower, and because the shower is always where you know, like, I don't know, think about how shitty everything is. But I would just stand there and I would try and count on my hand, like how many people would care if I died and stuff like that. Like really, just really, really depressed, very sad. I was also, maybe during that time and maybe shortly after, I was also self-harming. I was cutting myself, not bad, like not gonna kill myself, but I would like cut my wrists, and then I would wear like 1,000 hair bands around my wrist to cover it up, because it was like I wanted to hurt myself, but I didn't want to kill myself, and I kind of wanted to get caught, but I kind of didn't. And I even remember one time in the gym locker room, someone saying something about, why do you have like 50 hair bands on your wrist, and like panicking inside, like, oh my God, like I almost got caught. And I didn't want to get caught, but again, it was this like cry for help. But like if the focus was ever put on me in that way, like I would probably, if someone ever like saw it or questioned, I probably would have denied until I died, basically. It was a very confusing, conflicting period for me. But yeah, so he was the first person that I told this to, and when he kind of threatened me with it, it was another like, okay, like people are not safe to talk to about this. It is not something that you discuss ever with anyone, and if you do, they're going to use it against you in some way. So yeah, after that, I turned back to like staying silent for sure, keeping it to myself. I was never gonna let someone treat me like that again. It definitely, like they say, when you date people, it kind of shows you what you want in a relationship and stuff. And I knew at that point, like, I was never gonna be treated like that again. But that didn't mean that I didn't let guys treat me like absolute shit. Just in different, new, fun ways. So I, you know, turned into this pretty walls up, you know, brick walls, tough, angry, hardened teenager who I describe myself, I don't think I ever like went out of my way to like be mean. I don't think of myself as like a bully, but I definitely was someone that did not take anything from anyone. I don't think I went out of my way to be mean to anyone, but I also wasn't the kind of person that would take shit from people. And I could be really harsh and mean with my words if I felt like I was being messed with. So that's kind of who I was in high school. Kind of like, I'd say like, as far as letting things bother me, letting things get to me with other people, I was probably tougher than I am now. I remember when I started kind of like healing, I was like, my walls crumbled and now I'm this soft thing who's not tough at all. So yeah, I think of myself as pretty hardened and tough. I started kind of rebelling against my parents a little bit, and like I had a couple like teachers who were kind of creepy, not necessarily like pervy, but like it felt to me like they liked having power over me, or, you know, just students in general. And I started kind of rebelling against especially men like that. I kind of have always, since this point in my life, had a little bit of a like authority problem with men. I don't like to interact with men who think or do have authority over me. So I started to rebel in that way. I think at that point I was kind of not self-harming anymore, but I started experimenting with drugs and alcohol quite a bit. Luckily for me, and it's maybe I'll talk about this in another video because it's one of those very long tangents that I go on. I feel like in my life I've been kind of guided. Like there have been metaphorical bumpers up on my bowling lane of life, because when I experimented with drugs, I didn't like them. I didn't like how it felt. I did like alcohol, and there were times that it was kind of like, I had friends who were like dear to me call me out and like question my kind of alcohol use, but never to the point where I was like a full-blown alcoholic or anything like that. And I think of it as like something kind of blocked me from going down that path, some sort of like force beyond me, because I was trying and experimenting with that stuff. I think I was desperate to self-medicate, and I was just trying to find something that worked. And luckily, not luckily at the time, but luckily, nothing worked. Nothing helped me. Nothing numbed it for me. And so I just didn't like it. It didn't fit with the mold of who I was supposed to be. So I didn't stick with any drug. I kind of went crazy with alcohol in high school. And even by the time I got to college, it was kind of out of my system. I still got drunk like on plenty of occasions in college, but for me, really, I went wild and crazy in high school. And same with boys. I did have, when I say I let boys treat me like shit, I did have a couple really like nice relationships after this first guy. Everyone that I like actually dated was like a decent human being, a decent person. Even I'd go so far as to say like a really good person. It's just that those were not healthy, relationships because of the stages of our lives, because of my own toxicity, like at that point in my life, and just becoming toxic together. So, and obviously like everyone kind of, in my opinion, has their person. Those were not my people, but they were good people. The people that I really let treat me like shit were the in-betweeners in between my like serious relationships. So yeah, not my like significant long-term relationships, but other peeps in there. Yeah. I just wanted to make sure, like, if you've known me since high school and well, she dated this guy and this guy, like, no, they were good people. It's just the people you probably don't know about. By high school, I was kind of experimenting with various ways to self-medicate. And just using and abusing my body a little bit. I think that like when I reflect on it, I didn't necessarily feel like, like using my body is the way that I will get love. It felt more desperate than that. It felt like no one will ever love me, and this is all I'm good for, I guess, is the way that I kind of reflect on it. I wasn't like throwing myself at people like, please love me, or this will make you love me, but I felt like this is all I deserved and all I was good for type thing. I also like want to, I think one day I'm gonna write a book. that could go in way, way deeper detail, because it's the sexual abuse from childhood, certainly, that impacts the way that I felt and the way that I let boys treat me. But it's also the messaging that girls get from everywhere in society, that rape culture, that sexualization from such an early age. Because I remember, being a young teenager and starting to get the looks from men, my dad's age or older. I lived in a family culture where it was very normal for my grandpa to tell really nasty, crude jokes at the expense of women and women's bodies. From the time, as long as I can remember, just the messaging of that, women are objects, they're good for sex and that's it. They should look pretty and close their mouths, basically. All of that kind of contributed to the way I let people treat me. I think it's a good time for some deep breaths, right? Let's do it. Let's take a deep breath. Let's place our hand on our heart and our belly. No matter how much work you do, no matter how much you've processed, forgiven, grown, left behind, forgotten, it still sucks. It sucks. It's important for me and for you, if you can relate, to acknowledge those feelings and it took me a long time to understand that just because you get upset about something again, maybe you have even a horrible day, a horrible week, a horrible month because of your history. It doesn't mean that you haven't come a long way. It doesn't, you're traveling along the path of healing, you get a setback. It doesn't mean now again you're starting back here, or even back here you have to start over. It's just a little setback. You will just keep going. So crying about the same thing that you've cried about thousands of times doesn't mean anything for your healing journey. In fact, I think that if you stuff it down and you try and pretend it doesn't bother you anymore, you're probably not honoring your feelings to the degree that they need to be honored. And I have worked really hard with yoga in learning that my feelings, they're fluid. They come and they go. I always say in my yoga classes, if a feeling comes up, let it stay to say what it needs to say, and then let it go. We don't have to hold on to that sadness or that anger or whatever and make it a part of us. We also don't have to stuff it down, because that's a way of holding on to it too. If you just let it kind of come, I just had a big ball of grief come up, and I don't know what else. I could examine that a little bit further, and there might be a better word than grief or sadness. but taking a moment to sit with it and honor it. Like, I'm not trying to force it away. I originally was thinking when it happened, I was thinking I can cut this out of the video, but I think I'll probably leave it because I think it's a good example of like, I don't want to run from my feelings. My feelings are normal. They're justified. I'm going to let them stay and say what they need to say. And then I'm going to let it go. I'm going to let it pass and I'm going to move on with my life. And I know that there will be times that I cry about this exact same thing in the future. And I'm going to do exactly the same thing. I'm going to cry about it. No matter how it's kind of like they say about grief, it never goes away. Like, it's not going to go away. It's going to come back every now and then. But I have the tools to not let it kind of cripple me or feel like I'm set back or something like that. So yeah, that's that. Overall, as a teenager, I still kind of feel like I was on autopilot in my relationships, even in the way that I was interacting in school and in life and in my little jobs that I had. I just felt like I was on autopilot. And again, after that first horrible boyfriend, I really wasn't, I kind of resolved to never talk about it with anyone ever again. Like, I don't need to talk to anyone about it, and it's not safe to, and that's fine. That'll just be something that I never talk about, and I'll just go about my life. And I honestly probably would have continued that way forever, probably given myself some sort of, cancer or something by like just constantly pushing down how I was feeling inside. I'll mention that later on, but yeah, I probably would have gone on that way, never talking about it ever again. If it weren't for my senior year, my sister told my mom what had happened to her. And at that point, we did not know that we both, had gone through this. We didn't speak about it. I had suspicions, but I did not know for sure. And neither did she, because again, we just didn't talk about it. So my sister, for her own reasons, told my mom, and they happened to be, my mom was driving my sister to work when it came up. And they turned around and came right back, and I was home, and they marched in the door, and my mom like confronted me with my deepest, darkest secret at that time and was like, "Did this happen to you?" And I'm kind of surprised when I reflect on it that I didn't say no, that I didn't deny it. But it's another moment of like, I feel like some sort of divine intervention. I said yes. And that kind of is another marking point in my life of like a huge shift that was about to happen. But I think that this is a good time to leave, like, this is a good part one. First part of my video, I will continue on in another video. Gotta go get my pasta off the oven. It's yelling at me. So yeah. I'll see you for part two whenever I get to that.